The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
BronxNet. Your voice, your views, your vision.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk, the Bronx's flagship television talk show. The phones are open tonight and we welcome your input into our dialogue. Call in at 718-960-7241. You can also email comments to us at bronxtalk@hotmail.com and we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our program. Well, last week's primary elections in the Bronx brought defeat of a high-profile incumbent and the reselection of virtually all of the other Bronx incumbents. Tonight, we analyze those results. We talk Bronx politics with the Albany editor of Gotham Gazette, David King. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And also from the Perez Notes, the highly regarded internet interview program, it's Roberto Perez. Good evening. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Gary.
Gentlemen, a lot to talk about. It's kind of an interesting, or it has been an interesting political season in the Bronx. Let's start with the defeat of Pedro Espada Jr. I'll make the assumption that having access to new Roosevelt Initiative money and a heavy anti-Espada sentiment propelled Gustavo Rivera to victory. But my question is, and we'll start with you, Mr. King, why was the margin so large, especially in a place where incumbents are always reelected? Everybody said, goodness, it's going to take a mountain to defeat Pedro Espada Jr., yet it was practically 2-1. Was that a surprise to you?
It was a surprise. I was sitting with him a few minutes before the polls came in, and he thought it could go one way or the other. And I sort of had the same feeling because, but you know, I think it worked for him because Espada lost all his establishment support. The people weren't out there backing him. The political machine wasn't backing him. And the unions and everyone else went with Rivera. And I think not only did he have that on his side, but he had the press. And, you know, if you look at the Post, the Daily News, the New York Times, Espada is the enemy. And no other incumbent legislator faced as much pressure as Espada did. And if it takes that to oust an incumbent, it's sort of, I guess you have to question exactly what it would take.
Late in the game, he got support from Jose Rivera and Carmen Arroyo and others. So I guess most of the political establishment, but certainly Mr. Rivera has some followers, not significant enough at this point in time. Not a lot of power or attention comes out of Jose Rivera. David?
Jose Rivera? I suppose not. I mean, I think that, you know, I think it was late in the game.
Too late in the game.
I think it was I think it was late in the game. I think it wasn't, the support he got wasn't strong. The media was looking to talk to Espada very early on in the race and throughout it, and he only sort of appeared and took to the press late in the game, and the endorsements sort of, you know, I think were a little too late to catch anyone's attention after the substantial momentum that Gustavo Rivera had going in.
Your thoughts about the race, and then let's talk also about
the margin surprised me, the fact that Gustavo beat him 2-1. But there's, to me, the most important part of the factor of this election was that the demise of the WFP has been greatly exaggerated.
The Working
Families Party. They have an operation on the ground that is second to none. That is why the Randy Mastros and the Ed Koch's and the David Yaskey and Ed Koch wrote a piece condemning the WFP last year. And on the ground, I've seen it once, I've seen it twice, I've seen it a number of times. They made Pedro Espada public enemy number one between the WFP and the money that was thrown into the district by people like Bill Samuels. And it was that was it.
You know,
that was what made the difference.
You know, to me, and on this program, Dan Paternak said to Gustavo Rivera, and said, of course, all our viewers, that, you know, all that support, so what? So somebody endorses you, what is it really worth? To me, it was the money, and that you could have had all that political support, and people, well, that's nice. Fernando Ferrer came out, and the borough president and all that. But Gustavo Rivera had money. He could keep churning out flyers and mailers and things like that. That's a resource that, you know, I think other challengers don't get.
Certainly. I mean, I think there's a lot to be said for this man's history. I mean, he worked for now Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. He was
You're talking about Gustavo
Rivera. He had time in the Senate, you know, working as advisor for people in the state Senate. And besides money, he brought in bodies and people on the street to knock on doors and distribute literature.
Mm-hmm. So you think, and you have a wonderful piece that's up there now, GothamGazette.com, on Gustavo Rivera. You think he brought something to the table that we're all missing by talking about all his connections and everything else? That's your point.
Well, I think his connections helped him get that money, helped him bring those.
But I agree with David. Gustavo was involved with, or he worked with Chief of Staff to Andrea Stewart Cousins, and during the race when she defeated Nick Spano,
which was a big moment.
Exactly. So he's very experienced. He's no political novice, Gustavo. Gustavo's been around a long time, and he's worked in some close races. He also was involved in the first John Sabini Hiram Mons ride. I know we're in the Bronx, but that was a very close race. He was involved in that race too. So you bring obviously the ground game that the WFP brings in, the money, and Gustavo's no slouch when it comes to campaigning.
It's a very interesting point, and frankly, I haven't heard it anywhere else, and that is because we've all been looking past the candidate and looking at who's around him. You think he really brought something to the table?
Of course, he's very experienced.
Two quick questions. One is about Dan Paternak, and you interviewed Dan Paternak. If he stays in the race, does Gustavo win, or is it just simply closer?
Gustavo wins. It's just closer.
Really? Just closer.
Gustavo wins at the end.
With that margin, Gustavo wins. And I think Mr. Paternak wasn't running on much of anything, except that he thought he deserved to be in the race. Mm-hmm. And, of course, there's a lot of talk about why he was in the race, and it took Charlie King to get him out of it.
Although many people feel that this was the one guy, frankly, if Pedro Espada lives in Mamaroneck and Gustavo Rivera late to the district, Paternak is a true blood for that district. In fairness, he had a legitimacy to what he was presenting.
Certainly, and the Rivera campaign had said to me a number of times that Paternak is the kind of guy they need on the street, working with them to bring them the kind of information that they might not have.
Might not have had otherwise. Yeah. I want to ask you about being with Mr. Espada that night. You say that
Rivera.
You with Gustavo Rivera.
Yep.
I thought so. He thought it could go either way.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But
go ahead.
What was interesting is talking about the experiences he's had on the campaign. We sat down for dinner at a diner, and he said to me, I've been in this situation a number of times. I've had to tell my candidate, stop. You've done everything you can. We've hit every door we can. We've shaken every hand, and now it's time to just stop. And he's like, these people are telling me that now, and I know I need to calm down.
But I can't do it.
But, yeah. And the other thing is, it's interesting that there's a story around the campaign that he didn't really want in this race. That he has a list. He had a list. He made a list when the coup happened of people he thought could defeat Espada, and he went through it. He contacted all of them, and when the list ran out, and he realized there wasn't the person who couldn't do it wasn't going to get in, he decided he better do it.
And his own name wasn't on it. That's interesting. Is Espada done? He certainly pledged bravado, and he said, I'm not going anywhere, and that kind of thing. But is there anything?
It all depends on what happens with this investigation with Soundview. This the Attorney General's investigation. If he survives that, of course.
Well, that will take a while.
Well, that will take a while.
Do you see him doing something like running as a Republican or trying to get an independent line or something at this point?
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
But you never know.
We've underestimated him so many times. I wouldn't put it past him.
You wrote extensively about Senator Diaz, who was, I don't want to say reelected yet, but that's why I used the word earlier, reselected, because at this point, of course, it's not official. He said the anti-Espada sentiment and vote was racist. Is there, maybe I should ask you, because you're of a similar ethnicity. Start with you then, Mr. Perez. Is there a sense that this hit on Mr. Espada was based on ethnicity and this was an anti-Latino fervor out there in some way?
Absolutely not.
No way.
Absolutely not. When you think about things like vacancy decontrol and things that overwhelmingly affect his district, and the fact that he was raising most of his money from landlords. I mean, what's the median household income in that district? How could it be racist? I mean, he shut down the government between him and Montserrat and the Four Amigos. They shut down state government.
Not to mention that the person who was voted for was also of a similar ethnicity.
And think about the allegations with the sound. What is he doing to that community? If that's true, obviously we don't know until the whole thing comes to some type of conclusion. But I mean, look at the way the way he acted. He was living in Mamaroneck allegedly. I mean, that alone is a slap in the face to the constituents.
Reverend Diaz Senator Diaz, when he says things like that, does he get a base of support in the Bronx? People believe that? Or is it just not credible?
There might be a base of support, but I mean, if you look at Senator Spada's record, it's hard to say that.
Much like what Mr. Perez was saying.
I mean, I have to say, walking the halls of the Senate, there were people who would not speak to Senator Spada. The idea that he was majority leader was a farce. Half of his colleagues, more than half, wouldn't speak to him. He couldn't get work done.
We got a couple of callers on the phone, and I certainly want to talk about other races. We could sit here and talk a half hour about this. But
I want to add one thing before we go to calls. The next part of the segment is, I mean, how many wars haven't there been between the Diazes and the Espadas, the Riveras and the Espadas? So, I mean, it's like politics makes strange bedfellows.
That's true, and we followed them. In
this
case,
at one point they weren't friends, and now they're friends, and it's about race now.
Although in this case, the Diazes were split. I mean, the borough president is going to be here in a couple of weeks, so we'll certainly ask him about that. Do you think Eric Schneiderman, if he becomes the Attorney General, follows and pursues the investigation, especially since he's been criticized as being one of the people who compromised to get Pedro Espada his office and get the state government? Do you think he pursues it?
Oh, yeah. And, I mean,
vigorously?
After he...
if he wins?
Yeah. I mean, when he won on primary night, he pulled Rivera up onto stage with him and said, change has happened tonight. They need him, the state Senate, the Democrat state Senate needs him to regain control, and they need to expand their control,
right.
And they need, to be able to hold the spot up as a pinata.
The poster child.
Yeah.
In a way. All right, let's go to the telephone. We got a couple of our regular guys. Mark from Pelham Parkway is first. Hello, Mark. How are you?
Hey.
What's up?
Hey, Gary, gentlemen.
Hold
on,
you got to
turn
turn
this
off
down.
your TV or turn down the volume.
I'm turning it down. Okay, I
go.
have a couple of observations, then I have a question for
Okay,
the gentleman.
do it.
My observations are, I ran as a judicial delegate on Rob Giuffre's ballot, and Rob lost. He only got 1/3. He got 1/3 of the vote. Naomi won. And you're right, money does play. I mean, he ran his whole campaign on $2,500, and to get 1/3 and being an unknown for a first-time run, I think is phenomenal.
Okay, that's point number one. Do point number two. I want to move you along.
Well, let me finish. Now, I tried to find out from the Board of Elections who the judicial delegates are, who was elected from the 80th Assembly. They don't know yet. They said it'll take them 2 weeks to finalize the results. But here goes the kicker. The judicial delegation meeting is this Thursday, but they don't have the official results. So that goes to show you the Board of Elections. So my question to these gentlemen is, do you think the Board of Elections needs a federal oversight? Because after this last fiasco, I don't believe they have a clue of what they're doing.
It's one of the things I had on my list to talk about. This was Mr. Perez, what do you hear from people in politics and the thoughts about the Board of Elections and how this election was handled specifically?
It's all political. I mean, who are we kidding you? The Board of Elections is a patronage position. I mean, a lot of that stuff gets from the party bosses. That's how it happened. Even the mayor came out and said these are remnants of Tammany Hall. So it's no secret. Do they need oversight? Yes, they do. Will it happen? Like so many other things in politics, I don't think so. Not now,
what are they saying up in Albany, looking down south and saying, goodness, what went on down there?
I mean, I have to agree with him in that, it'll be on people's minds, politicians' minds, for maybe another week, and they'll try to get as much play out of it as possible and say that things need to be done and things need to be changed. And how terrible was that? And who knows if they actually do the hard work to get it done.
Is the number that our caller brought up significant? That the fact that Rob Giuffre got 30% without any money but lost to Naomi Rivera. Is that a significant number, or it really doesn't matter because obviously he was defeated anyway? You can have at it first.
It's a significant number, and you look at the margins by which a lot of these incumbents won, and it's absolutely insane.
You mean because they're so large?
Because they're so large, and this was supposed to be the year of the anti-incumbency, and everyone's angry and throw the bums out, and it's definitely not what happened. What happened was that these guys won by large margins.
I think he ran a very good race, considering I'm on my program. He was saying
he was on your program.
Kenny Augusto. He wanted Kenny to run. Kenny Augusto decided not to run. He got in late. He made it on the ballot, which with no resource, very impressive. He made it on the ballot, got on and got a third of the vote, considering he had no money, no resources. I think he ran a very good race.
Let's just address that for a second. Everywhere throughout the state of New York, people complain like crazy about incumbents. They talk about Albany. My goodness, they throw the bums out. It was headlines in all the papers. Well, what two, three were thrown out, and the rest were voted for and selected on primary day? Why is that? Why do incumbents, despite what appears to be significant dissatisfaction, why do incumbents get reelected?
It's because of the get out the vote operation, I think. Think about the turnout. Turnout is porous. I mean, very few people vote. I was looking at the numbers in some places, in very important races. When you think about the future of the state and the city, the borough, of 3,000 people, 4,000 in districts that consist of 100,000 people. And think about the get out the vote operations. They're primarily labor unions, if you want to call them a special interest group. People, prime voters, triple prime voters, right? These lists.
So it's a matter of the operation.
Exactly. To maintain the status quo, certain people don't get the door knock.
You have differing opinion or something to add to that?
Well, I mean, it's hard to find quality candidates when you're going up against someone with so much money that this is unlikely to happen unless some miracle, some union decides suddenly that you're the guy, even though you have little chance. And if you look at Charlie Ramos's campaign against Senator Diaz, he said that he had a number of people who were talking about backing him, talking about coming out very early for him, and he thought that he'd have momentum. Instead, he was drawn out through court battles with petition challenges. And then when he finally got around to being able to knock on doors, I mean, Diaz had already held 1,000 block parties and right. drove his.
So it is this process that you can tie up a challenger in court, and then, as you say, by the time Rob Giuffre talked about it, sitting in that seat, that he said it took me weeks before I could even get out and get started. Let's go to the telephone. Our friend Bob from Riverdale, who writes for the Bronx News. Hello, Bob. How are you?
I'd just like to inform your guest that Espada does have the independence line that his friend Dr. Fulani gave him, so he'll be back on the ballot.
He's going to be on the independence line.
All right, now.
Do you think, Bob, let me ask you something. Do you think he's going to work it and really try to be there, or he's just going to let his name go?
I don't know. I haven't asked the senator, and I would imagine that he probably has an uphill battle and can't win anyway because the Democrat wins here in the Bronx.
Right.
Now,
so you got a question or a comment?
Yeah. As far as the Espada race, my original column 2 weeks ago had Espada at 34%, with Dan Paternak winning the race until he dropped out. It was a key factor that in the North, the Attorney General race brought out a lot of the extra vote. As a matter of fact, 24% more people voted in the 33rd Senate District than 2 years ago. And actually, Pedro Espada lost 1,381 votes, or 28%, if you look at the numbers and do the analysis.
So what is your overall point here? Let's move
Gary,
this forward. So what's your point here is what?
Well, throughout the Bronx, when you look at the various assembly districts, the incumbents used to win by 90% in the primaries. Now they're winning with low 70s.
I don't know, he got cut out, but basically he was reinforcing the same thing that we've been talking about, is that even though they're losing, challengers are losing by smaller margins. I mean, they're getting a larger segment of the population. Let's talk about the Bronx Democratic Party. You want to?
Well, I'd just like to say, I mean, if as Ed Koch said, this was the biggest chance in the next, 5 decades, whatever his term was, to oust the incumbents. and what you see is a tick of 10% maybe that these incumbents are getting more than they are losing by, getting that much more vote. It's not a significant margin if this was supposed to be the tide. This was supposed to be the one chance.
What if it's not the big year
Right.
for it? I wonder if we'll be back to 95.5. Let's talk about Carl Hastie and the largest political party in the Bronx. They backed Hector Ramirez in the 86th AD over incumbent Nelson Castro. How big a loss is this for Chairman Hastie? You came in and said you didn't seem to think it was that big a loss, so that the one race they really had an interest in, they couldn't carry.
Well, I think that Nelson obviously was a big winner. The fact that they used a lot of resources to help Hector dethrone him. We saw the case of Maria Baez a couple of years back, where they made her a priority candidate, and they took her out and replaced her with Fernando Cabrera. So, but I think it Carl's the demise. If I've been reading in some of the prints, I think it's been exaggerated. I think Carl is going to be around a lot longer.
Mm-hmm. Your thought? Was this a huge defeat, and everybody's going to say, you know what, he had one race, he couldn't bring it home, so what good is the operation?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's an assembly race, and there are a lot of assembly seats in the state.
Okay, not for borough president or something like that. Why did Hector Ramirez not do well? The rumor is that his English, he didn't come on our show, which I was shocked. We gave him the opportunity to. Rumor is that his English, his speaking language, was not that good. Any thoughts?
I haven't spoken to the man.
Okay, you?
I think
you tried to interview him
I
also.
tried, and through via Fernando Aquino, it didn't happen. I had Nelson on as a guest, and Nelson understood that he was in for the fight of his life, and when your back's against the wall, sometimes you have to fight, and you have to really pound the pavement, and I think that's what Nelson
you'd
did.
rather give
He
Nelson
understood.
the
He understood that everyone was coming, all people that were gunning for him. So he just made, he really fought, and he came out victorious.
Jane tells me that Bob came back, and we're sorry we lost you. I don't know what happened there, but go ahead, Bob.
Did you get the point I was trying to make about the Attorney General race up north?
Meaning that it brought people out, but once Dan Paternak left, that base of support was gone.
Right, but the turnout was 24% more in the 33rd district.
Okay.
And Espada got 28% less of the vote, or 1,381 less votes.
Right.
Which was amazing. Now, as
Bob,
far
you got to
as
be
the
quick.
Hector Ramirez race with Nelson Castro,
yes,
there was no third candidate, as in the Cabrera race. And Nelson told me, Assemblyman Castro said to me, that Maria Baez had a problem with her health and she couldn't be out in the district. But as for him, he would be out in the district, which is what he was, and he got out.
So it gave him a better chance to be on the street, and this is what thank you, Bob. This is what Mr. Perez was saying, in that he really campaigned hard and he really wanted it, and he came on here and was I thought reasonably strong. Let's talk about and you wrote about this, the Luis Sepulveda and Peter Rivera race. I guess similar to what Ed Koch said, I thought Peter Rivera was vulnerable, and I thought Luis Sepulveda ran a vigorous campaign. What happened there? Why couldn't he do it?
There were people that said to me, if he knocked on as many doors as he claimed to and he couldn't beat Rivera, then no one has a chance. I don't take it as seriously, because I do believe people felt that there was an outside influence pushing Mr. Sepulveda in the race, and he did have it may not be extremely important to the district, but his stance on gay marriage was a bit wavering, undecided.
You saw the debate we did here.
Yep.
Wavering, to say the least.
Yes, and I asked him, I followed up and on your interview as well, and the debate, and his answer got longer, and he eventually called for, he wanted a referendum on the issue, which I don't believe we could do.
But at this point, to not have a stance on that issue, especially when it's a challenging one. Now, Mr. Perez is smiling, but your interview, he was very clear about how he felt about it, and he got more and more vague, because he was vague here and then vaguer with you. What was your thought about Luis Sepulveda?
I think obviously when the race gets closer, and the consultants and the people advising him got in his ear, I think he switched his positions, because he understood that it wasn't something that was going to, it was not an issue that was going to bring votes. That's the bottom line. So he just, started to backtrack. That's politics.
Politics, but it also is not winning politics. I mean, in my mind, I'd love to see somebody take a stand in
The
something.
strategy didn't work this time.
We want to put up the website so people can, find out about Gotham Gazette and also the Perez notes. So we're going to put those on the screen while we talk about this last question. Who replaces Pedro Espada from the Bronx's perspective in a position in the Senate or in the Assembly? What power or authority does the Bronx have now to move issues that are important to the Bronx forward in Albany?
I think you have to think that Rivera, if he wins in the general, Gustavo Rivera is a superstar. They need him right
Even
now.
though he's a freshman.
Even though he's a freshman. Even Senator Diaz has been out demanding that the majority leader position be filled by a Latino, and Gustavo Rivera is on that list. He's ready to get behind him. I don't know that that's going to happen, obviously.
Somebody don't mention that to Jeff Klein. Is that what we should say? Go ahead.
But I do think that they have to give something to the Bronx. They know that they're going to,
So
after this.
somewhere up there. And your thoughts about
I have to agree with David. It's probably the way the political game is played. It'll probably be Gustavo's going to be. Cause
really, which would be very rare for a freshman.
I think he comes in with a little more influence than the most freshmen. And again, let's not forget that he worked for Andrea Stewart Cousin. He has good connections with the labor unions, and he's done a lot of work behind the scenes.
Does he owe people favors, as was one of the charges, because he got elected? Your smile says yes. Go ahead. You'll get the final word here. And GothamGazette.com and what is it?
The Perez Notes. Blogspot.com.
Blogspot.com. Go ahead.
Well, there were a number of senators who did step up and really went out on a limb to support him, and they heard it from their colleagues. They got in trouble for going against one of their own. But
even though it was Pedro Espada Jr.
Yes, but you do remember that the Democrats have to win the majority. There will be no majority leader post.
David King, Gotham Gazette, Roberto Perez, and the Perez Notes. We're going to have you back. You guys are great. Thank you so much for joining us, and keep focusing on the Bronx. That's so important. If you have further comments or questions on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, then email them to us at bronxtalk@hotmail.com, and we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our program. Archives of the show are available at blip.tv. Just search for Bronx Talk. Now, next week, we'll talk about the controversy over removing the trees on Pelham Parkway. Everybody's eyebrows went, oh, yeah. And make a note that October 18th, which will be our 16th anniversary show, Borough President Diaz will be our guest. We're here every Monday night. We'll fill in the weeks in between with something else interesting. Bronx Talk every Monday night at 9 on BronxNet, Cablevision Channel 67, Verizon Fios 33. Special thanks to producer Jane Folloro, director Michael Arias, and our cast of thousands that are up in the booth. And to you,